What's going on, YouTube? And welcome back to Goal Line Hockey. It's Kevin Forte today. We are going to discuss the latest on Mitch Marner. There's a lot going on here, a lot of drama, so we're going to try and break it down, and we're going to take a look at the latest on where things stand with Mitch Marner. So, the 27-year-old is looking for a new contract, and he signed a 6-year deal back 6 years ago. Didn't go the full 8, and there's a lot to break down here because let's start with the past that led to this point. 6 years ago, Kyle Dubas was in contract negotiations with Matthews, Nylander, Marner, and they thought the easiest guy to re-sign who would take a quote-unquote hometown discount would be the kid that grew up in Toronto, being Mitch Marner. And that didn't end up happening. He took as much money as he could get, held out of training camp for a couple of days, to the point where I think Leaf fans really turned on Mitch Marner after that. And I think it was enough of a thing where if Marner was able to perform in the playoffs, was able to bring a Stanley Cup to Toronto, fans would have forgiven it. But none of that happened in the 6 years that Marner has been with the Leafs. And now it's to the point where he is a pending UFA at 27 years old, in the prime of his career, ready to get the biggest paycheck of his life. And I think when you look at the situation around Marner, ever since then, it's been hostile. And I think at this point, I think for both sides, it looks like both sides are going to mutually kind of separate themselves. And I think what's also interesting is the teams that have been mentioned that Marner would like to go to, because the Florida Panthers and the Vegas Golden Knights appear to be teams that Marner really wants to go to. And I hate to say it, Marner, but so does everybody else in the league. Mitch, everybody wants to go to Florida. Everybody wants to go to Vegas. Not that it's impossible. It's going to be a lot for him to be able to get to those places. Or maybe not. We'll discuss that. So I think the biggest thing was the no trade clause at the end of this season, which was only for 1 year. It was a no trade clause that kicked in on July 1st last year. So the entire final year of his contract, he had a full no movement. And apparently Carolina had offered up a trade in the package for Mikko Rantanen, which reportedly Mitch Marner said no. He did not want to go a part of that deal to Carolina. So it makes you wonder, a couple months later, I guess he isn't thrilled about the idea of going to Carolina. So you could almost pencil Carolina out of it unless Carolina is truly that interested and maybe they try to go for him again in free agency. He takes a tour around the facility. Maybe he does end up wanting to go to the Hurricanes. So I think Carolina is going to be a team to watch here. I think a couple of other teams that maybe a lot of people don't really think about. Look on the West Coast. Look at the Los Angeles Kings. I think that's another team like Anaheim. Anaheim really wants to spend money this summer. Expect them to be making a splash in free agency with the players that are available. I expect them to, the way they kind of run things in Anaheim. Pat Verbeek is definitely going to go after Sam Bennett. I could totally see that one. That's the type of player that Pat Verbeek wants on his team. So if it's about the money, they might be able to outbid a lot of the other teams that could be going for him with the money. And I think Pat Verbeek would pay up to get Sam Bennett. And there's been reports that there's a team willing to give upwards of $10 million to Bennett. I wouldn't be surprised if it was the guy out in Anaheim that was potentially offering that. Again, don't know for certain, but just kind of breaking things down by elimination, you do wonder if that's on the table. So for Marner, he is the top free agent in the market. You look at some of the other guys around him, you have Tavares, you have Ehlers, you have Besser, Bennett, some pretty good players, but not Mitch Marner good. And I think once Marner's name comes off the board, those other guys will kind of filter their way out. But I would assume everybody's top choice going into free agency, the top target is going to be Mitch Marner. And with the way Mitch Marner has kind of treated things, you wonder if his agent Darren Ferris is going to maybe pull a little bit of something to try and get some extra money out of the places he wants to go. But the problem is that negotiation might not work as much as he thinks it will going to Vegas, going to Florida, because a lot of guys take discounts to go to Florida and Vegas. And a lot of that is also because the no state tax. So if Marner's expecting to get $15 million this offseason in a no tax state, he might not get that. He really might not get that. And I think a lot of teams also have seen what he's done in, with the Leafs. Like in the playoffs, our team's going to be turned down to the idea of like, this isn't really a guy that gels, or which I think a lot of things are in play here. I think the biggest thing is for Mitch Marner, it just didn't work in Toronto. And I think a lot of teams see that it just wasn't a fit with the Leafs. If he comes to our team, he'll be better. And that's a very interesting way of looking at it, because you look at it that way, well, yeah, that's kind of a you're kind of flat, you're flattering yourself, but the reality is this really a Marner issue or a Leafs issue? And are you going to give $15 million to find out that answer? That's the other thing too here. Whoever takes him, as much as he's a great player, you are taking a chance on him, because if he's making $15 million on the new team and in the playoffs he doesn't show up, well, that's going to be a big issue. And that's no longer a Toronto issue, it's a Marner issue. But do you want to be locked into giving this guy $15 million per season for the next 7 years and find out in year 1 or 2 that that's what's happening and that's what's going to be the case for the rest of his career? That's a tough blow. And that could be ultimately something that really screws over a team. And we've seen it happen to teams before, giving big money to guys that probably don't deserve it, and it really blows up in their face. And for Marner, this is the perfect storm in the sense that things probably don't work in Toronto. The salary cap is going up so much. So the fact we're even talking about teams like Florida or Vegas even being in the conversation for Marner is wild. But because of the salary cap jump this year, those teams are realistically in the mix for a guy like Marner. And they are one trade away from having more than enough cap space to make that work. So with the way I look at it, I ultimately think he's going to end up going to one of those teams. I do. I think Vegas or Florida, if that's where he wants to go, I have a feeling in this contract he might be willing to take more of a discount. And I think that's really going to hurt Leaf fans, because that's going to be a tough pill to swallow. Like, here we are, like, this is a kid that grew up here, wanted to play for the Leafs, hometown kid, and he signs for less money on a better contract somewhere else. That could be rough. Or even if he takes $13 million to go to Vegas or Florida, that would still hurt just as much, because it's like you were in your own backyard at your own home in Toronto and you wouldn't take the same contract. It has to be more than 13 for any Leaf fan to be like, okay, that's slightly justified. I don't know if it's going to get there. So the other option too, if he wanted to go to Utah or Anaheim, he probably could get closer to that 14 or 15 million per season. But also, again, you're going to be playing in Anaheim. Or, I hate to even say it like that because I love the Ducks. They're my second favorite team. But you might be ending up in Anaheim or Utah. And Chicago, I think, is going to put in a pretty good bid for Marner. And I wonder if that's something that kind of gets brought up. If he has a chance to play with Connor Bedard, one of the next coming rising stars in the NHL, is that something that could be attractive to a guy like that? So let me know what you guys think. What do you think of Mitch Marner, and where do you think he's going to end up going? I think it's going to come down to those bunch of teams. I think it's Utah, Anaheim, Chicago, kind of at the bottom of the list, but they're going to really be pushing to get him. And then I think Vegas and Florida are the other teams. There's 5 teams realistically that I think have the best shot at getting him. He's already reported that he doesn't want to go to a Canadian team, so that's out of the picture. And continuing that narrative that players in free agency don't want to play in Canada. And that's coming from a Canadian from Toronto, and he doesn't want to play in Canada. There's something to be said about that. So let me know what you guys think down below. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.